Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. Hey Chaplain is the officer wellness podcast, which brings you expertise and wisdom from police officers around the world. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are sharing their wisdom and experience so that you don't have to do everything the hard way. Today is a crime history episode, and we're going to talk about the BTK serial killer, Dennis Rader. Rader is known to have committed at least 10 murders between 1974 and 1991, communicating with the media about his crimes, but not getting caught. He called himself BTK for bind, torture, kill, and he had disappeared for 13 years when suddenly he began communicating again with the media and the police. This is the story of how he got caught. My guest today is Dana Gouge. He was a detective at the Wichita Police Department. He'd worked in patrol as an FTO, in the police academy, and in undercover narcotics, but he spent the majority of his time in the homicide unit. This interview is going to cover the investigation of BTK from 2003 to 2005, which led to Dana being the detective who actually handcuffed one of America's most famous serial killers. Here's Dana Gouge. You occasionally worked cold cases. Tell me about that.
So, as a homicide detective, we weren't always busy in Wichita. There weren't enough murders to keep us busy all the time. And sometimes it was extremely busy. One time I remember I thought I was going to quit because I had like 72 hours of overtime in a week. And at the end of that, I couldn't function any longer.
Yeah.
So we have those weeks, but you also have weeks where nothing's happening, right? Where there aren't any murders, and that could go 2 or 3 weeks at a time sometimes.
And you're working other unattended deaths, suicides and naturals and accidents, right?
That's true. So we're still getting called out for those things, but those investigations, once we determine a manner of death, they're not as difficult or time consuming as working a murder case. So in our downtime, I'll call it downtime, we would pick up cold cases. And, there's a list of cases that are solved and unsolved there in the unit. And when we had an opportunity, my partner and I, his name's Kelly Otis, we asked if we could work on the Vicki Wegerle murder, which occurred in 1986.
You're working a case that's almost 20 years old. You certainly can go back and find detectives who worked it. You can even go back and interview people perhaps 20 years later. But what else did you do to approach this almost 20-year-old case?
Well, one of the things that I like to do when I was working on a cold case, well, you obviously read all the reports and do the things that you were talking about. But I want to go through the evidence and see what evidence is there that now we may have technology that we didn't have before that we could submit for testing. So this was 2003, and that case occurred in 1986. So clearly DNA had come into being. The CODIS system was up and running at that time. And I saw that their fingernail scrapings hadn't been submitted for DNA testing. So I think it was the summer of 2003. I got those from our property room and took them to the forensic lab and submitted them for DNA testing. And cold cases don't take priority.
Yeah.
Right. So they sat for quite a while.
But they had been submitted.
Yes, they had been submitted. They were able to generate an unknown male profile from the scrapings of her fingernails.
Okay.
And that profile was entered into the CODIS system and didn't get a hit, meaning it didn't match any known DNA or unknown DNA that was in the system already. That doesn't mean that they hadn't been arrested prior to collection of DNA, but
they haven't been arrested recently enough that they had a DNA sample taken.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So you are working this cold case in 2003. What did that comprise? So you had the Otero murders. How many of those were linked together at that point?
At that point, there were 7 murders that were linked together.
Okay. But not counting Wegerle?
No, Wegerle wasn't counted in that. They hadn't connected the Vicky Wegerle case to the BTK case yet.
At this point, you're almost 30 years from the first BTK killings. Do you look through the list of cold cases and think, boy, a bunch of these might be BTK, or maybe none of them? That BTK killer might have gotten a lot of people or very few. Did you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, we discussed whether or not Vicky Wegerle could have been a BTK victim before we even took the case as a cold case.
Okay. So that was a possibility.
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
It was definitely a possibility because of, similarities and the way she was bound and that sort of thing, and she was strangled. Ken Landwehr, who was my boss, he had been working on the BTK cases for a long time. He was part of in the 1980s, they put together a team called Ghostbusters, and he was a part of that, where they looked at all the cases and tried to solve them, but weren't successful. He had suspicions that Wegerle might be a BTK case, but we didn't have any real proof of it until Landwehr submitted the Otero case for DNA testing. And when that came back, the semen from the scene matched the fingernail scrapings from Vicky Wegerle. So now we know that Wegerle was a BTK case.
Okay, so that was definitively linked when the DNA evidence came back.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was BTK, like, in the cold case files that you were working, and you said there were maybe hundreds of cold cases in Wichita at the time?
Yeah.
More or less. Was that number one with a bullet, or was it like, well, that's one of several things we're really interested in? In 2003, how big a deal was BTK to the homicide team in Wichita?
We had done a search warrant or two throughout the years that I was there on the BTK case. That was Landwehr's thing. But when we get a tip, we'd all come together. We'd try to work out that tip and go from there. I did write a search warrant because, we got a tip about someone who had an original letter that had been sent in to the Wichita Eagle. It was called the Eagle and Beacon back then. But we drew up a search warrant and went and searched, and he had a copy of the letter. But we found out from that point that the Wichita Eagle employees, they made several copies of the letter when they first got it from the library in 1974 or whenever that was.
Okay, so that was a dead end.
Yes.
Right. Were you optimistic in 2003? Like, oh, we'll get this eventually, or just like, boy, we may work this the rest of our lives and never find out?
Well, there were different theories about BTK. I mean, some people thought he was probably dead. He hasn't killed anybody that we're aware of recently, so he may have moved to another city, maybe killing people there. We don't know. Or it could be somebody that committed some other crime and is spending life in prison for that. These were the main theories of what was going on with the BTK case.
He could have been caught and be in prison somewhere. He could be dead. He could be out murdering people other places.
Right.
We just don't know.
Right.
So what changed in 2004?
Well, in 2004, BTK started communicating again.
Okay. What prompted that?
Well, what prompted that was, and I know this because, Dennis Rader told me, what prompted it was the anniversary, the 30th anniversary of the Otero killings.
The first killings.
Right.
Yep.
And with that anniversary, a lawyer who worked at Friends University was writing a book on BTK, and that was being published, and it became kind of big news on both the news and in the paper about this book coming out, on or about the anniversary of the Otero killings. Later, we learned that Rader didn't want someone else telling his story. So he ended up sending a list of chapters of what his story is, and then actual writings about some of these killings. That
just vanity? Is it just, I mean, is this purely ego, or was there something else there? I mean, you've met the man. He really just didn't want someone else to have control of his story?
He was so full of himself. It was unbelievable. When we did actually sit down face to face, it was sickening to me as far as how proud he was of what he had accomplished in his mind.
Yeah.
And
murdering 10 people.
Exactly. And what an honor it should be for me to be able to be one of the people to sit down and talk to him about what he had done. Okay, so the first communication in the modern era, I'll put it, was he sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle. And in that letter, he had included a photocopy of some Polaroid photographs of Vicki Wegerle. And he had like this code across the top of it. You know, it started with like GBSOAP 7, something, a bunch of letters and numbers, and some photocopies of like some fake IDs where, you know, he blacked his face out, of course, and a list of chapters for his story.
Right. How the book should be written.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So it came to the Eagle in an envelope with a return address to Bill Thomas Kilman. So BTK.
Yeah.
And a reporter at the Eagle brought that to the police department, gave it to the PIO at the morning briefing. And then a couple of days later, he brought it up to the homicide unit to give to Lieutenant Lamware. And he walks into Lamware's office, and I'm, you know, in the bullpen outside of Lamware's office. And I say, hey, Lamware's not in there. So, you know, kind of stating the obvious. He comes out and said, well, I got this letter. And I said, well, let me see it. So we step into Lamware's office, and Otis, my partner, he comes in there too. And we look at it, and I put on a pair of gloves and take it from him and open it up and see, well, these are pictures of Vicki Wegerle. And there were no crime scene pictures of Vicki Wegerle because the ambulance came in and they transported her before the crime scene ever got there.
So this is her in situ. She's at the place where she died.
Yes.
Pictures that only the killer could have taken.
Right. Right. Exactly. And there's a copy of her driver's license, which was missing. So he still had that trophy, the trophy of the driver's license,
the photos.
And the photos. And, you know, looking more closely at the photos, you could see that she was not in the exact same position. There's 3 different pictures.
Yeah.
And she was probably in the process of dying when he was taking these pictures.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So this is huge as far as working a cold case. I mean, this is new evidence. This is like a direct connection to the killer.
Of course, he, you know, sends it to the press. Lamware was off. He was actually at Riverside Hospital with his wife, who was having some sort of procedure that day. So Otis and I get in a car, drive out to Riverside Hospital, and we find Lamware out there and show him the photocopies. And, you know, he said, well, get ready, boys. This is going to be bad.
What did he mean by that? Did he mean he knew more was coming, or did he mean that it's going to get busy, like we're going to go get this guy? Or how did he mean that?
All right. So the press knows. They can put two and two together. You know, they are going to come out with a story about this, which is just going to be, you know, big news all across the country.
And not necessarily helpful to the investigation. Right.
Not only that, you know, so we know that whoever sent these has things belonging to the killer or is the killer themselves.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even think about that this could be a third party with access to the killer.
Right. That's something that
didn't even occur to me. Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
Otis goes to the Eagle and talks to them and talks them into, hey, wait, you know, 48 hours before you publish the story, or however long they agreed to. I don't remember exactly, but they decided, you know, they agreed they would wait until we're ready before they're going to publish the story. So then we have a strategy meeting. Someone had reached out to the FBI, and they sent 2 agents from the behavioral analysis unit, you know, the profilers that you hear so much about. And we also invited the KBI in, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, to come to this meeting to help us figure out what are we going to do? Because when this news comes out, we know that, you know, there'll be a lot of tips coming in. right? A lot of people trying to help.
You have this big strategy meeting, and you got FBI profilers there.
Right. So the FBI profilers, they came to really learn about the case and then try to offer whatever help they can. So Landwehr did a 4-hour presentation on all of these cases that have occurred, the 7 cases that 8 cases now that we were aware of, because we had clearly connected the Vicki Wegerle case. So after that presentation, the very first thing they said to us, you're expecting, something that's just going to really be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, these are the experts.
That's right.
Yeah.
They understand all of this stuff. They've studied it. They've worked with them. So this is what they said. BTK may or may not live in Wichita.
That's the most, that doesn't say anything. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Captain Obvious. So,
yeah, right. That's got to be a little disappointing.
Right. Well, man. So my partner says, let's get the F out of here. Right. But, we stayed anyway.
Yeah.
And, but working with them, we developed a strategy. They were of the opinion that if we can keep him communicating, that he will eventually make a mistake and then we'll be able to catch him. That was the strategy. And
okay.
Well, that strategy worked.
Yeah.
So this is how it was decided that this should go. That one person would be the spokesperson for the police department. No one else will ever talk to the press except one person, and that was going to be Lieutenant Ken Landwehr. And he would speak not only to the press, but in all press releases, he was going to speak directly to BTK. And because of the narcissistic personality of this killer, that person would identify with Lieutenant Landwehr.
Yeah.
They would form a bond in his mind.
Yeah.
And when we do catch him, they're going to be like buddies.
Yeah.
So every time Landwehr would make some statement like, I really think BTK would be really interesting to talk to.
Play to his ego.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's exactly what he wants to hear, presumably. Right. And the profilers were correct. The profilers didn't make a great first impression, but they were correct overall.
Right. They're great guys. I
became valuable parts of the team.
Right. And I got to know them. And we had a good time working together. So when the news came out, we had also prepared basically a call center where we had a bunch of detectives from other units, from other departments, assisting, taking calls. Mm-hmm. And like in the first 48 hours, there were over 500 tips come in on these lines. So you can imagine trying to go through these tips. So these are tips, but they're leads, right? Yeah. These are things that you have to ferret out.
Man hours are going to have to be applied to these. Right. And you're getting now hundreds of
thousands,
these leads.
Right. Yeah. It's like, 1,300 total.
What's the quality of it? Was it just mostly busybodies barking up wrong trees, or were you getting useful information from these tips?
Well, not one tip said it was Dennis Rader. So.
Right. It says something about the quality. Yeah.
Right. The tips would most of the time name someone who they would suspect of being BTK. Okay. So then we have to eliminate
barking up wrong trees.
Right.
And it's a lot of work to eliminate everybody's neighbor that they don't like. Right. And so,
well, it can be, right. And then
everybody's suspicious acting uncle had to be eliminated.
Exactly. I mean, there were ways in which we could eliminate people without ever contacting them. Mm-hmm. Like if they were, born in 1970, they're eliminated. Right. That's not BTK.
Right.
But if they were of the right age, we could try to determine where they lived, whether they were ever incarcerated during any of the crimes. So those are other ways that we would try to take steps to eliminate them from the office.
And you specifically had the first set of murders, the first 4 were in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. And Wegerle's one of the later ones in the mid to late 80s, right?
1986.
Okay.
Yeah, there was other evidence. Just from the MO that linked them, the communications that he sent following them. He communicated after the murders, right? So like Nancy Fox, and he actually called the police to report her murder, the next morning. And then they went out and found her. But then he would later send to the media, kind of a description of what had occurred. And
was there a recording of his voice, or was just a record of it?
No, there's a recording of it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it doesn't sound like him. It sounds like a robot or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's not a good quality recording.
All right. So let's get back to 2004. And he's contacted the newspaper. The strategy is to keep him engaged. And Lieutenant Landwehr is going to directly address him and try to kind of draw him in that way. And that seemed to work. Can you tell me how that played out?
Yeah. So over the next year, he sent packages at different locations around in Wichita and outside of Wichita. And in January of 2005, he really started upping his game as far as how often he was doing it. So on January 25th of 2005, he contacted the Cake news station, KAKE TV, and told them about a cereal box that he had left near a road out in the county in north of Wichita. And so they drove out there and found it, stomped around it, smoked cigarettes, threw those on the ground, and then decided to call us. Right?
Yeah.
So
God bless them.
We go out there and we get from them also the note that he had sent them to alert them. Mm-hmm. And when we looked at that note, he also asked if we got the package that he left at the Home Depot on January 8th. Well, no one called us about a package at the Home Depot on January 8th. There's 2 Home Depots in Wichita, one on the east side, one on the west side. We were able to contact the employees, and one said, I found this cereal box in the bed of my truck, and it said BTK bomb on it. And I just thought it was some stupid joke, so I threw it in the trash. And that was like 2 weeks before. So, but he says, but I forgot to take my trash out, last week, so it should still be in there.
Oh, wow.
And so a detective goes there, and he gets into the guy's trash, and there's the box underneath a pillow. So the guy had tossed a pillow over the box, so the other trash that went in afterwards didn't disturb it. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that wasn't intentional. That was just but God working.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's extremely fortunate that that's playing out like it is, because normally that would have been lost. That would have been in the trash. It was gone forever.
Exactly. If he would have remembered to take his trash out when he was supposed to.
Yeah.
If he wouldn't have covered it with a pillow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have been contaminated and gone.
Right.
But instead it was recovered.
Right. And it was in good condition. And in that, he has a note to the police wanting to know if he can communicate by floppy disk without it being traced. What's kind of funny.
Is he asking your advice on why would he trust you?
Well, because he's developed this relationship with Landwehr, right? So he thinks
Landwehr's a friend.
Right. Well, that he's not going to lie to him about this.
And of course, Landwehr should respect him.
Right. So,
yes.
So in this note, he says, respond in the Eagle in the personal ads. So we did and put an ad in there that said, Rex, it'll be okay. Because he wanted us to call him Rex for some reason. So,
well, he thinks he's doing all cloak and dagger.
Right. Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's all very.
He thinks he's pretty smart.
He does. Yeah.
The Home Depot drop, though, isn't that how you got a description of a vehicle?
That's right. So we were able to get the video from that day, and some FBI analysts looked at that for hours and hours and hours and hours. We knew where the guy had parked his truck. So we wanted to see if we could identify when someone came and dropped something in there, maybe get a vehicle description or whatever. And sure enough, I mean, he parked way out there by the street. So it's not like a good quality video. Okay. It's very pixelated.
You're seeing it in the distance of a grainy video.
Right. And you can't see any features of a person or anything like that. But But you can see this black Jeep pull in and stop next to the truck. And someone gets out of that Jeep and goes around to the back of the truck and then gets back in the Jeep and leaves out of the parking lot the same way they came in. Now we have a clue that maybe BTK is driving a black Jeep.
Okay. So we got a vehicle description and how confident, I mean, you're like, because he could have borrowed a vehicle. He could have had a third party drop it off for him. I mean, I'm trying to look for the confidence you have here, because originally, and just a year or two previous, you didn't know if he wasn't in prison or dead or whatever. But now you're getting communications. You are can you put a percentage on it? Your team was what percentage confident this is the killer? He's alive and he's still in Wichita.
Well, I think that we were leaning toward that he was the killer.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we believed that he
percentage
was
was going up.
Whether or not he owned the Jeep, that was a different question. But now what are you going to do? So we're going to get a registration for all Jeeps in Sedgwick County. You can imagine how many thousands of those are. But, have to start working through those or, see who they belong to.
Right.
It wasn't even, the Jeep he was using, but it was his son's Jeep.
Okay. So even if you had found the specific vehicle, you still would have been 1 degree removed from the actual person you were looking for.
Right.
And you weren't there yet.
Right. Yeah. We never got that far before what happens next on February 16th of 2005.
He actually sends a floppy disk.
He sends a floppy disk to the Fox TV station in Wichita. And me and Otis go out and pick it up, and we drive it back to our offices, and we have a computer forensics expert who was working with the team, and he, looks at the disk, and there's one Word file on it, and on that there's metadata in that file that he's able to tell that, that it was printed by someone named Dennis. The software was registered to Christ Lutheran Church in Park City, Kansas, and that it was also in a computer at the Park City Public Library. The computer forensic guy, he pulls up Christ Lutheran Church in Park City and finds the president of the congregation is named Dennis Rader. Then they do a DL search for him, find his home address, his age. He would be appropriate.
He's matching.
Right.
But this is the first you've heard the name Dennis Rader.
That's right.
Right.
And we race to the parking garage, jump in our cars, and speed to Park City, Kansas, which, it's a 20-minute drive. And I didn't drive fast enough. So the other car got there first, and they drove by the house. And in the driveway, there was a black Jeep parked there. So at this point, I didn't drive by too. They were like, we didn't want to tip him off, whatever. So
your marked cars or unmarked cars?
Unmarked cars.
Okay. But still.
But they look the same. They're detective cars.
Yeah,
right?
Obviously, right. Yeah, probably county plates or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a black Jeep there. So they decided to start a surveillance on him and try to be able to get some DNA from him. So they used our undercover narcotics unit to do 24/7 surveillance on Rader. They were going to follow him if he spits out a piece of gum, throws down a cigarette or whatever, to try to get a known sample from him.
Right.
To compare to the DNA that we've had.
But you guys end up doing a very creative, or at least from my point of view, it seems creative and unusual way of linking the DNA to him. And so tell me how that came about.
Right. So, doing a background on him, we found out that he was married, had 2 kids. His daughter had attended Kansas State University, thinking that she may have gone to the medical clinic there. We got a court order for a pap smear that she had provided while she was a student. And KBI agent went there, seized that with the court order, took it to the lab, and within 24 hours, the lab was able to tell us that this woman's father was BTK.
Wow.
It established probable cause. We're still going to need his DNA, right?
Okay.
But that
got you PC.
Right. That got us probable cause to get an arrest warrant for him.
Okay.
To get search warrants for his residence, his office, anywhere else that
the church.
Right. We had a total of 9 search warrants at different locations, and one of them being his body to get his DNA and an arrest warrant.
So let's talk about the arrest. Who goes to make the arrest?
So there were 2 patrol officers and 2 KBI agents and 4 detectives. So we're sitting off. They had been surveilling him. They knew his routine. He would drive home from his office every day at lunchtime and go home for lunch. And then he'd go back to his office. So we decided we're going to arrest him on his way home because they knew the exact route he would take. So we're sitting off a block off of his route. And we have a couple patrol officers. They're in a unmarked car, but it's equipped with lights and siren. And so we got our cars lined up, and we have a discussion beforehand. And, I get to put the handcuffs on him. Okay. That's what we decided, right? So, which, was kind of a big deal. Everybody
like Rochambeau or how, rock, paper, scissors or
no, we started talking about it, and they said, well, why don't you cuff him? And the guy I was in the car with, Clint Snyder, he said, but you got to use my handcuffs. I said, all right, give him here, So anyway, the helicopter's following him.
Okay.
They see him leave, as he usually does, and they're calling in on the radio as he's traveling. So just as he's about to get to where we're at, we pull out behind him and pull him over. And he immediately pulls off to the side, like a good upstanding citizen would. And, the car, his work truck is kind of bum rushed, and Ray Lundeen, a KBI agent, grabs him out of the truck, throws him on the ground, and I handcuff him. So then he's walked back to a detective car where Lieutenant Landwehr's waiting, and they open the back door of the car. He looks in there, sees Landwehr, and says, "Hello, Mr. Landwehr."
I'm so sorry to do this to you, but I'm going to cut the interview right there and deliver part 2 next week. In part 2, Dana's going to tell us about the face-to-face interactions with the serial killer, Dennis Rader. Dana and I will also discuss the long-term effects of encountering evil as a police officer, what you can do to mitigate its effects, and what Dana is doing now to bring something positive into the world. Now, normally I would give you a preview of the next episode, but instead I'm going to give you some bonus material from this first half of Dana's interview. In the first clip, he's talking about working in a task force and what he'd do differently if he could do it over again. And in the second clip, we were discussing the pros and cons of being connected to a famous case. Here they are.
I wasn't always as nice a guy as I come across today, right?
Okay.
I talked about how God has changed me. So when this first started, I was a homicide detective, and I wasn't necessarily nice, right? Like when we were starting this team approach involving the FBI and the KBI, when the FBI guys came, or the KBI guys came in, Ray Lundeen, who is a great guy. I love him. I think he's fantastic. He's an excellent investigator. I started off mean mugging him, right? Because, what do you know? What do you bring to the table? How many murders have you worked, right? To come tell me how to do this job. Right?
Was he even local? Was he local to Wichita? Or was he
no, he's from Topeka.
So he came from Topeka.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
That right there is enough to, obviously this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Yeah.
Well, over time you get to know people a little better, but I didn't always welcome, the help that was being provided. And looking back, it would have been nice if I could have just been nicer when this help is arriving, because we definitely needed it. A lot of times, when you talk about, like this case, this BTK case, people think that, well, that's all you've ever done, right? Like, well, you worked that big case. But the fact is, every other case is just as important to me when I was a homicide detective. And I wasn't, like I said, nice about it, right? I was very aggressive in investigations and worked hard to try to bring justice for these people.
Yeah.
And when people see you as the BTK detective, then I really think that diminishes who you really were and what you accomplished throughout your career. And everybody that works a case, any case that involves a victim, and they take that seriously, then, that is something that they should take pride in.
This show is free for everyone because of those supporters who are quietly helping behind the scenes. If you want to help this show reach more cops, chaplains, and other first responders around the world, please follow the link in the episode description to support the show. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.